We are Sophie Goodwin, Daniel Feldmann, and Allie Jane Kilgore, and this is our presentation titled Screening Our Screen Time, the Effective Use of Personal Devices in the Elementary Classroom. So first, just to begin, let's clarify our terms and describe what one-to-one schools are. One-to-one schools are schools in which every student has their own personal technological device. So that could be a tablet, could be a laptop, could be a Chromebook, and the one-to-one just refers to the device to student ratio. This has actually been in practice for over 20 years, but we'll detail a little bit later about how the pandemic and other factors have increased the prevalence of one-to-one schools. And students use these devices for all kinds of things that we'll describe as the presentation progresses.
All right, so let's dive into a brief history of technology in the classroom. First thing we have to ask ourselves is what defines classroom technology? And that has looked different through multiple eras in our educational history. In the colonial era, we had everything from the pencil to the hornbook to the magic lantern, which was an early ancestor, I suppose, of the slide projector. In the 1800s, we developed the chalkboard, and then in 1888, we went all the way to the ballpoint pen. In the brief span of 31 years, from 1950 to 1981, we moved from the overhead projector to the laptop computer. And with the advent of the World Wide Web in 1990, we were able to connect all of these devices, all of our laptops, our desktops, and other such things, to allow for technology such as the email, which gives us instantaneous communication between the home and the workplace, the office and the school, or anywhere else that we need to reach out. Now in the 2000s, technology and technology development looks very different from what it did before. Rather than all of these new inventions that are completely reshaping our classrooms, we are developing new software, things that we're using on our devices to innovate and keep the classroom an exciting and engaging place. And specifically in this presentation, we'll discuss one-to-one technology integration initiatives that really began in the last about 30 years within our classrooms and have kind of taken on a new prevalence after the COVID-19 pandemic.
So just to give a brief overview of what our presentation is going to talk about, we are going to be answering the research question, how can teachers intentionally integrate one-to-one technology with their instruction to optimize learning and student development? We're going to do this by first reviewing the literature, so highlighting a couple of studies that have really demonstrate the impact that technology can have on math, literacy, and general developmental outcomes like student motivation, achievement, curiosity. And then we're also going to talk about some classroom applications if you are a teacher who's going into a one-to-one school, different general do's and don'ts in your classroom, ways that you can improve student outcomes and enhance their learning. And then we're going to end just by providing some helpful links. And then we look forward to discussing this more when we see you during our presentation time on ACE Conference Day. So by the end of this presentation, teachers will be able to implement research-based practices to enhance math, literacy, and engagement in their one-to-one classroom. So our presentation is aimed mainly toward those teachers who have one-to-one schools, which means every one of their students has access to technology, although any teacher who's interested in how to use technology in the classroom will hopefully benefit a little bit from hearing what we're talking about today.
The first thing that one-to-one devices can be really useful for is mathematical instruction. So there exists this phenomena called the math practice gap, wherein young students don't get many opportunities to practice their math skills outside of school. So if you think about all of the words and phrases and stories that children get seeped in just throughout their day-to-day life, you can really imagine all the possibilities for those kids to practice reading outside of school. It could be something as simple as reading billboards and signs on the highway, reading a menu at a restaurant, reading a cereal box at breakfast. But for math, creating those kinds of authentic practice opportunities is much more difficult. That would look like an adult at home, maybe printing out a worksheet or creating problems on their own piece of paper, and then students doing those problems, the guardian or the parent checking them. It's onerous, it's more involved, and the practice isn't as simple to arrange or as easy to accommodate in busy family schedules. So that causes the math practice gap, and one-to-one devices can help close that gap. Students who practice math fluency daily on fluency platforms like Freckle Math, Prodigy, IXL, Extra Math, 99math.com have all kinds of benefits from that practice. These are platforms which give students a problem set in one of like the 4 major operational areas, and then provide immediate feedback based on the answers that students give. So for instance, 99math is designed like a racing game, and students play as a class or as individuals. They're given an increment of time that the teacher can set, and then a certain number of problems which a teacher can also set in division, multiplication, addition, or subtraction. Students are just prompted with questions and then type in their answers and immediately can see which ones they've gotten correct and incorrect. This kind of structure can be really motivating for students, not only because the technological delivery is very engaging compared to a worksheet, but also because most of these platforms are really highly gamified. So students enjoy features like leaderboards and avatars. There's immediate feedback, like I mentioned, so they can immediately correct their mistakes for the next time a problem appears. It's easily accessible. There's no need to set up problem sets that an adult has to think of when they're already pre-programmed in a device. And you can target practice for specific students that need work in certain areas, especially times tables. And importantly, there's lots of opportunities for self-paced learning. So if one student is still just working on their addition and another is ready to move to division, this is an easy way to differentiate that in your class. It's also a great way to share ways students can practice at home with their families if there are math milestones students need to be reaching that necessitate they do extra practice outside of class.
All right, so let's talk about technology's effect on literature studies. In recent years, the implementation of one-to-one technology in schools has largely reshaped the way we study in the classroom overall, but particularly when we approach literature and literary studies. There's this assumption that technology like tablets and computers can aid student learning, and indeed they can, but there's little research that's actually been directed towards the elementary classroom in this area. So it'd be nice to see more development there in future years. One of the hypotheses that has arisen is this phenomenon called screen inferiority effect that was largely addressed out of a study of undergraduate students, and a follow-up study by Salmeron, Delgado, Vargas, and Gill redirected it towards upper primary school students, largely aimed at children from about 10 to 13 years. In that test, in that study, I should say, they worked with primary students and kind of hypothesized that working on tablets would not only increase their distraction levels in terms of how much they're actually able to get done within a day and within a set amount of time, but that would also damage their comprehension. What they found was that comprehension level largely depended on like how much it did or did not damage comprehension, largely depended on the student's comprehension level going into using the technology. Students with lower comprehension levels at the beginning suffered some from struggling with comprehension in reading on a tech-based platform, such as a tablet. And students with higher comprehension levels, it actually showed no real change from whether they were reading in a digital format or an analog format. So whether they were reading on a device or pen and paper. Yeah, that moves on from the Salmeron study. Technology in the classroom for literature studies also really expands the classroom library beyond the confines of the bookcase. That means they have access to more texts and more authors from around the world, and it allows us to bring in more multicultural resources and implement those in our classroom for everything from reading lessons to social emotional lessons that we center around texts. This also allows us to increase accessibility to those texts with things like audio recordings and author read alouds. Many of those you can find on YouTube, but you can also find them in more rigorous and more organized settings as well, which we will get to later on in this presentation.
Great. And so in addition to improving specific student outcomes in math and literacy, technology also has the ability to foster motivation and engagement more generally in students. But there's some kind of a few guidelines that are important to just keep in mind as you are using technology to make sure that you're doing that. The first is to try to reserve tech-free times throughout the day. There's a lot of information about the impact that technology has on the developing mind, and not all of it is good. In fact, overexposure to media can lead to some really negative developmental outcomes. And so you can model using technology as a tool in a healthy way by implementing it thoughtfully, and then also implementing tech-free times thoughtfully at the same time. Like Jane mentioned, game-based apps have been shown to increase engagement and motivation. And same with math apps, especially the ones that we mentioned that are geared toward informal practice. Those have been shown to increase students' intrinsic motivation because they're not really followed with like any sort of extrinsic. If you get this grade on this, then you get a reward or praise or something. Students can be driven, especially if you are thoughtful about the way that you speak about it, they can be driven just by like an excitement to see themselves improve. And so a lot of these apps have different, like it'll show you when you've mastered this set of fluency facts or this specific idea. And so fostering just an excitement for students to see themselves improving, that's a really positive thing for intrinsic motivation. Like Daniel said, reading apps that expand cultures and genres can increase curiosity in the classroom. And so you can use texts and the internet and digital collections to help increase motivation by giving students a sense of wonder about the world and seeing technology as a tool that they can use to start to answer some of those questions.
Technology can also be useful as behavior management within, of course, certain guidelines. So one thing that is useful is platforms like ClassDojo. Studies show that behavior management, when implemented on like a trackable basis for students, can be really powerful. And platforms like ClassDojo facilitate that in a digital way by allowing teachers to really quickly log and reward specific positive behaviors. The only caveat with that is that if behavior points or other indicators are visible to all students on their devices, the teacher should take steps to reward students as a whole class or as teams rather than as individuals, so you don't create like a shameful environment. There are platforms which teachers can use that allow each student to view only their own points and rewards. Most of those are either in development or based in other countries, like the one that we studied for this research. But as an educator, I would be looking to the future to see more things like that. Teachers can also offer extra device time as a reward using like fun and appropriate teacher selected sites. So just in my own experience, many game sites can be really exciting for kids to use. Sites like the Hubble Space Telescope, images, tie-in pieces of content that students get really interested in. And so if you can find a way to build like healthy and sort of moderated device use in your classroom, that can be a wonderful reward. There's also lots of digital brain breaks and like cool down guided meditations, such as those on Calm Classroom. Teachers can use those as whole group interventions, or they can send one student to take a break, maybe in a peace corner or in the hallway with their own personal device, and have them be guided through a meditation to help them relax and get back on track. There's also lots of self-paced modules, such as on Neopod, which can help behavior management by just engaging students in the lesson. If students can work at their own pace, they're less likely to talk to their neighbor or get up and walk around the room because they're focused on what they need to get done. So those can all be great tools for behavior and engagement.
So with tools in mind for implementing tech in our classrooms, let's specifically look at ELA. Right off the bat, we have Freckle in the top left there. Freckle is a K-12 differentiated learning platform that works with students across math, English language arts, social studies, and science, and kind of allows the teacher to set what subject area and what content that the students are receiving. And then Freckle differentiates for the student based on an algorithm and the inputs that they are getting for the questions that are being asked. Prodigy English is a similar game. It allows the teacher to set what subject area or what content within a subject area the students are studying. And again, it uses an algorithm based on student input and a pre-assessment that it does online to differentiate for students as they go through. Grammaropolis is a similar game to Prodigy English, and that one it really digs down into like parts of speech and things like that. Bookflix and TrueFlix are two services by Scholastic. There's actually a third one as well called FreedomFlix. Those are largely aimed at different age groups. Bookflix is kind of a K-3 age group. TrueFlix is 4 through 6, and then FreedomFlix is 4 through 8, but FreedomFlix is largely tying literature and social studies together. It's very integrated between the two subject areas. The way they work is teachers are able to assign a nonfiction text. It'll pair, Bookflix will pair it with a fiction text. Typically, it actually gives the fiction text first. I should have mentioned that in order to increase student curiosity and kind of have some fun with the lesson right off the bat. Then it brings in the nonfiction text so that students can make those text-to-text connections. And then there are activities, games, and videos that the teacher can assign as well that continues to integrate and work on those topics. So those are just some really fun tools that work great in your classrooms for teaching ELA content this upcoming year.
Awesome. And so going off of that, just some practical ideas of ways that you can implement math in your classroom or enhance that instruction. For fluency practice, there's a lot of platforms like Extra Math, Prodigy, IXL, 99math.com. And then so those are all geared toward fluency practice. So for example, I teach second grade. A second grade standard is that by the end of the year, they have to have memorized all of their addition and subtraction facts. And so like some of those like Extra Math give all students just an array of facts. And then once they've shown that they've mastered one, then they add in another and another. And so I get real-time data about how my students are progressing toward that standard. And then on the other side, ways to enhance your instruction is, like we mentioned, Nearpod. It's a kind of presentation software where students are either working on a lesson at their own pace, or you can host a lesson as the whole class, and on each of their devices they see the same screen and they're completing the same activities. You get real-time data as they're going through it. And then also a lot of curriculums will have their own apps that are associated with it. So like Everyday Math has its own app. A lot of them do. So it's worth looking into that if you already have access to an app based on the curriculum that your school uses. And then Khan Academy also has a lot of videos and activities for free. Some of these are free already, like Extra Math. Prodigy has some free features. And then Khan Academy, and some of these packages that we've mentioned with literacy and math can be more pricey, but my recommendation would be once you get to your school site, immediately you can talk with your administrator or other teachers at your school about what apps are available to you, because likely if your school's invested in one-to-one technology, they've also invested in apps that your students can use at the same time. So get a sense of what those apps are and then see how they can either enhance your literacy or your math or your engagement based on what we said here.
So with all the things that you should do, there are of course also some things when it comes to personal devices that we would call don'ts. One based in the literature is that, which Daniel mentioned, if you have students who are already reading at a lower level, those students are not good candidates to read on a device rather than on paper, especially under time constraints. So if you give students a set block of time, like say 20 minutes, to read a passage and then answer comprehension questions with a partner, that's the kind of thing that would really be best to do on paper with your lower readers, because the addition of a tablet or a Chromebook, etc., can just be a distracting factor for students who are still just doing their best to master comprehension skills. That's also especially an issue for expository text, because text of that kind can be a little bit more challenging as it is for readers of all levels. Obviously, one big stewardship issue for teachers of young children or students of any age is access to the internet. Like Sophie mentioned, if your school has one-to-one tech, they likely also have some kind of policy about monitoring students' access to the internet. And the younger students are, sort of the more critical and hands-on this monitoring becomes. There are softwares which allow teachers and administrators to monitor Google searches and usage and the like. GoGuardian is an example which is paid, but there's also one called ClassKick, which is free. And teachers who use that software can see the screens of all of their students' tablets or Chromebooks on their own desktop or laptop. So it's really easy to redirect students, and it also serves as a collaborative tool because students can like raise a little virtual hand and get help from a peer or a teacher. It's also important to make sure that expectations and consequences don't operate on like a preconceived notion of students' tech access at home. So, not every student has access to reliable Wi-Fi or even electricity. So we don't want to punish students for not bringing a charged device to school. And we also don't want to assign online homework before we know if students can do it at home. That's really just a matter of getting to know your students and speaking with their families. But if there are opportunities during your day to charge the devices, maybe when students are at snack or lunch or recess or a special, if there's time when they can complete online work so that it doesn't go home, that's sort of the more inclusive practice that ensures that you're not leaving any of your students behind. And on a similar note, the beauty of tech integration is that it is such a great tool for differentiation. So don't assume that the technology in your classroom will kind of be a one-size-fits-all solution. Students are going to come to class with different exposure to tech. They might be skilled or less skilled at using it, and they might need different things. So, just the joy of having access in a one-to-one school is that instruction can be really personalized and really tailored to what each student in your class needs.
Great. And so just as some concluding remarks about what we've gone over, one-to-one schools are those in which every student has access to their own laptop or tablet. Those are school provided. And when implemented thoughtfully, technology can enhance students' learning, engagement, and motivation. Some key findings are that it minimizes the math practice gap, it expands classroom libraries, it increases curiosity about the world around them, and it allows for differentiation and personalized instruction. If you are saying this sounds great, but I wish that I had a list of resources that I could use when I get to my classroom, don't you worry, it's right here. If you go ahead and scan that QR code, there's a list with all sorts of different resources that you can use across subjects, so that you can start up on day one ready to use one-to-one technology like a champ.
Well, that concludes our presentation, and thank you for watching.